The year is 1934. We're on a cold, jagged rock in the middle of San Francisco Bay. Killers, mob bosses, escape artists, the worst of the worst, the ones the system couldn't control, are being sent here, to this place, built not just to imprison criminals, but to break them. This is Alcatraz, the end of the line. A fortress of steel and concrete surrounded by frigid waters. Escape is said to be impossible. Survival, not guaranteed either. This raises the question of doubt. It's just a prison, right? So what's so different about this one? Well, it's not just the cells. It's not even the isolation. It's what this place did to the men inside, to their minds, their will, to their very sense of being. You see, Alcatraz wasn't just designed to keep people in. It was designed to mentally break the unbreakable. And some of the names you'll recognize, like Al Capone or Machine Gun Kelly, others you've probably never heard of. But every one of them left a piece of themselves behind the walls of Alcatraz. This isn't just a story about crime and punishment. It's a story about control and despair, set in a prison that became legendary. So buckle up. We're diving deep into one of the darkest chapters of American justice. This is Alcatraz, where the unbreakable were broken. We're off the beaten path. As we board the ferry and leave the port, you can see a little distant island out in the bay. The ferry ride is only about 15 minutes, but the mood shifts fast. It's not like arriving at a typical tourist destination. This is something different. Stepping onto the island, it hits you how truly cut off this place really is. It's like entering a foreign country where the rules don't quite apply. You can still see the city. You can almost hear it. We know that everything here had to be brought in, both then and now. There's no food, no drinking water, nothing to sustain you. Inside the prison, the air hangs heavy, stale, even musty. Every sound ricochets off the walls like your high school gymnasium. Footsteps, voices, a distant cough. Sounds don't disappear here. They bounce, they build, until it's a low, restless roar. It's no wonder James A. Johnson, the first warden of Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, had a no-talking policy. To him, it was not just the confinement, but the isolation and silence that would wear a man down. The cell blocks are tight and narrow. The bars are ice cold. Running your fingers along the chip paint, you can almost feel the passage of time. It's rough, brittle, worn down by the hands of men who had nothing but time. The paint didn't just peel from neglect. It was rubbed away by desperation. Every flake feels like it could be a fragment of a story that was never told. We walked into the tiny 5-foot wide, 9-foot deep, 7-foot high cells where men lived for years behind bars. No color, no privacy. You can imagine the boredom, the routine, the slow grinding weight of days that don't end. What really got us wasn't just how harsh this place was.
This is what they would have seen all day long.
It was the feeling that it still holds on to everything, like the walls are still listening. Being here isn't just a tour, it's a confrontation with the myth of Alcatraz, with the men who actually lived and died inside these walls, and with the question that echoes through every corridor: what does it take to truly break someone? So what made Alcatraz so legendary in the first place? It wasn't the size. The island is only about 22 acres. And it wasn't the number of inmates. Just over 1,500 total ever served time here. The maximum capacity of Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary was only 336 inmates, but it rarely held more than 260 to maybe 275 at a time to maintain strict control and reduce conflict. This relatively low number was intentional. Alcatraz was built for control, not crowding. Every prisoner had their own cell, and the staff-to-inmate ratio was much higher than in a normal federal penitentiary. Every inch of Alcatraz was engineered to crush escape attempts. Strategically positioned guard towers with 24/7 armed patrols, steel-reinforced cell blocks with thick iron bars, a daily inmate count system that included a dozen checks a day was so precise you couldn't sneeze without being noticed. Beyond the walls, that's where the real trap was. The prison sits in the middle of San Francisco Bay, cold, violent, and unforgiving. The currents can reach 6 knots and the water rarely climbs above 55 degrees. Hypothermia can set in within minutes. Locals say the bay doesn't need sharks. Nature itself was the deterrent. From 1934 to 1963, it housed some of the most dangerous men in America. Hitmen, gangsters, bank robbers, and escape artists who had all outwitted other prisons. But here's the thing. Even here, behind reinforced bars and surrounded by a natural moat of death, some still dared to try. Despite the odds, from 1934 until the prison was closed in 1963, 36 men tried 14 separate escapes. Nearly all were caught or didn't survive the attempt. But one night in 1962, 3 men slipped through the cracks. What happened next became one of the most mysterious prison breaks in U.S. history, but we'll get to that later. August 22nd, 1934. The most dangerous man in America steps onto the island's dock. And for the first time in his life, Al Capone is powerless. Capone registered as number 85, quickly made headlines and thrust Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary into the larger public psyche, which may have been exactly what the Bureau had hoped for. The feds never explained why Capone was assigned to Alcatraz, but it seemed fairly clear it was a public relations move. The federal government wanted everyone to know that Alcatraz was the toughest prison in the country. Unlike his fully furnished cell in Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia, Capone did not enjoy any special amenities in Alcatraz. This was Scarface, the king of Chicago, a man who owned judges, cops, even entire neighborhoods. But here, he wasn't a boss, he wasn't a legend, he was just inmate number 85. No more silk suits, no more steaks smuggled into his cell, just 5 feet by 9 feet of concrete, a steel cot, and a toilet with no seat, because at Alcatraz, everything was designed to humiliate. He tried to play the game. It worked before for him at Eastern State. Offered guards bribes. They turned him in. Proposed music lessons for inmates. The warden said no. He eventually got shanked in the barber shop by a low-level crook. Al Capone wasn't in the yard or causing trouble. He was doing what most inmates did, his assigned job. That morning he was sorting laundry near the barber shop when a fellow inmate, James Lucas, walked in for a haircut. The guard wasn't paying attention. Lucas didn't hesitate. He grabbed a pair of shears from the barber's table and lunged at Capone, driving one blade into his back, just below the heart. Capone survived the attack, but the message was loud and clear. On Alcatraz, even a man like Scarface wasn't untouchable. Lucas paid the price. He lost 3,600 days of good time credit that he had saved up for an early release. That's nearly 10 years gone. Lucas was sent to solitary confinement for his attack on Capone. What most people don't know is Capone was sick, not just physically, mentally. Years of untreated syphilis had started eating away at his brain. On the outside, he was the king of Chicago. On the rock, he was confused, paranoid, slipping. Other inmates said he talked to people who weren't there. He spent long stretches in the prison hospital, and by the end of his time at Alcatraz, Capone wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was just another broken man. His behavior became so erratic that by 1939 he was deemed mentally unfit to remain in prison. Officials transferred him to a prison hospital in Terminal Island, California. He finished his sentence quietly and retreated to his Florida mansion, where the once feared gangster spent the last years fishing in a bathrobe with the mind of a child. Capone didn't go out with a blaze of glory. He faded out. If you're enjoying this video, help us out. Click that like and subscribe button below. You've probably heard the nickname, the Birdman of Alcatraz. Hollywood wanted you to believe Robert Stroud was a gentle genius, a man who found redemption in the flutter of canaries' wings. The truth is, Stroud never kept a single bird on the rock. That part of his legend? It happened earlier during his time at Leavenworth Prison in Kansas. The real Robert Stroud was far from the misunderstood genius Hollywood made him out to be. His story begins in 1909, Not with birds, but blood. In Alaska, Stroud murdered a bartender, shot him at point blank over an unpaid debt for a prostitute Stroud was pimping. After the killing, he calmly took the man's wallet to settle the bill. Convicted of manslaughter, he was sent to McNeil Island in Washington. But prison didn't calm him, it sharpened his edge. At McNeil, Stroud attacked a hospital orderly he believed had snitched on him, trying to get narcotics. Then he stabbed another inmate. That behavior got him transferred to Leavenworth, where things got even worse. In 1916, he murdered a prison guard, stabbed him with a homemade weapon in front of dozens of witnesses. He was sentenced to death, but his mother launched a massive campaign for clemency, and the sentence was reduced to life in solitary confinement. It was during those decades of isolation that Stroud took up ornithology. He studied and bred birds, canaries, mostly gaining the reputation as a self-taught bird expert. By 1942, Robert Stroud's bird research at Leavenworth made him famous and dangerous. He wasn't just breeding canaries. Behind the scenes, Stroud ran contraband, manipulated staff, and built his own underground network. The Bureau of Prisons decided to end it. They shipped him to Alcatraz, where Warden Johnson made one thing clear: no birds, no favors, no second chances. Stroud was locked away 17 years in near total isolation. His world reduced to a cell, a bucket, and his own mind. Imagine 6,200 days alone. No human touch, no voice but your own screams. Stroud cracked open. Wrote legal rants. Faked insanity. Stroud grew desperate for any form of companionship. At one point, he even begged the warden to let him keep a pet rat. The answer? Still no. Denied. The guards knew the truth. This wasn't a scientist. This was a predator who would kill again if they blinked. Stroud would spend 17 years in isolation before being quietly transferred to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Missouri, where he lived out the rest of his life. In total, Stroud spent about 42 of his 54 years in prison in solitary, making him one of the longest solitary confined prisoners in U.S. history. When you think of Alcatraz, it's easy to imagine loud, violent criminals constantly causing chaos. But Alvin Creepy Karpis was different. Nicknamed Creepy not because he was spooky, but because of his cold, unsettling stare, one that made both inmates and guards uneasy. Karpis was a mastermind of the Baker Karpis gang, notorious for bank robberies, kidnappings, and violence during the Great Depression. The FBI even named him Public Enemy Number 1 in 1936, the last of the infamous criminals to be captured. Sent to Alcatraz that same year, Karpis would spend a staggering 26 years behind those walls, the longest of any inmate. But one of the strangest brushes with history didn't happen on the Rock. Years later, at Terminal Island Federal Prison in California, Karpis crossed paths with a young inmate named Charles Manson, long before Manson would become infamous. Manson, desperate to make it as a musician, asked Karpis to help him learn guitar. Karpis, an accomplished musician himself, taught him some basic chords and technique. In Karpis' own words, he was just another punk trying to make it. I never imagined what he'd become. Despite his fearsome reputation, Karpis was calm, intelligent, and rarely caused trouble. He didn't try to escape or start fights. Instead, he played it smart, keeping his head down and surviving the brutal prison life through quiet endurance. When Alcatraz closed in 1963, Karpis was transferred and eventually released. He spent his later years in Canada, far from the Bay and the Rock. After his release, Karpis said this about life on the Rock: "It wasn't the worst place I served time. It was quiet, safe even. The worst were the guys who couldn't handle their own minds." He swaggered in with a nickname straight out of a gangster film, Machine Gun Kelly. But the truth? George Kelly wasn't the ruthless outlaw the headlines promised. The real mastermind was his wife, Catherine. She bought him the Tommy gun, gave him the nickname, and told reporters he was Public Enemy Number 1. The gun? Mostly a prop. Their big crime was the kidnapping of oil tycoon Charles Urschel. They received $200,000 in ransom money, but Urschel, blindfolded, he paid attention. He remembered the overhead planes, the sounds of a pump, even floorboards, clues that helped the FBI track them down. In 1934, Kelly landed on Alcatraz, inmate number 117. He arrived with a reputation, but inside the rock, he was quiet, polite. He spent his days in the library and the laundry. The myth faded, the man was ordinary. The inmates called him Popgun Kelly. Machine Gun Kelly served 17 years on Alcatraz before being moved to Leavenworth, where he later died of a heart attack in 1954. The legend still echoes, but here he was just another name swallowed by the silence of Alcatraz. May 2nd, 1946, a quiet spring afternoon on the rock until everything exploded into chaos. It started when 6 inmates, led by a hardened convict named Bernard Coy, launched a desperate plan to escape. They called it the Incident, and it would become the bloodiest conflict in Alcatraz's history. Coy and his crew had been watching closely. They knew the guard routines, the schedules, and where the weapons were kept. In a carefully timed move, Coy overpowered a guard, crawled up into the gun gallery, broke in with a makeshift bar spreader, and took control of the armory. Now armed with rifles, pistols, and improvised explosive devices, the inmates had the upper hand. Their plan? To take hostages, steal keys, and escape by boat. But there's one problem. The key they needed to open the final door was missing. A guard, thinking quickly, had hidden it in his pocket, which, with that single move, the entire escape unraveled. For 2 days, the cell house became a war zone. It wasn't a failed escape. It was a full-blown siege. Gunfire echoed across the island, grenades were thrown, guards were taken hostage. Marines were called in to help retake the prison. It was all-out combat right inside the walls of America's most secure penitentiary. When it was all over, 2 guards were dead, several others wounded. 3 inmates, Coy, Marvin Hubbard, and Joe Kritzer, were killed. The others, wounded, captured, and eventually executed or given life sentences. The Battle of Alcatraz showed the world just how dangerous the prison can be, even with the toughest security in the nation. June 12, 1962, the guards at Alcatraz woke up to 3 empty beds. Well, not exactly empty, because propped up on those pillows were handmade dummy heads staring back cold and lifeless. It was supposed to be impossible. Steel bars, concrete walls, armed guards, and beyond the prison, a bay so cold and violent it could kill you in minutes. But in 1962, 3 men proved that impossible was just another challenge. Frank Morris, the mastermind, brilliant, quiet, a man with an IQ that made him dangerous. John and Clarence Anglin, brothers, bank robbers, tough, disciplined, and determined. For 6 months they worked in silence, turning everyday junk into escape gold. They chipped away at the back walls of their cells using spoons from the mess hall and drill parts smuggled from the prison workshop. The holes were concealed by fake cardboard grate, carefully covered with paint, and the guards walked past every day and never noticed. They also stole 50 raincoats, glued them together with stolen contact cement, and built a 6-foot raft. Each evening following the completion of their self-imposed work detail, they would hide the materials on top of the cell block to minimize any chance of being caught with the contraband. They even made papier-mâché heads made from soap and toilet paper, complete with real hair taken from the barbershop floor, so guards wouldn't notice that they were gone during the night checks. Then, sometime after lights out on June 11, 1962, they slipped through the vents, climbed the utility corridor, scaled the roof, and disappeared into the night. No blueprints, no trial runs, just pure, desperate genius. Come morning, all that was left were the dummy heads lying on the beds. A massive manhunt followed. The FBI searched air, land, and sea. Pieces of the raft washed up. 1 life vest was found, but no bodies, no arrests, no proof of death. For decades, the government called it a failure. They said they drowned. End of story. But evidence proved otherwise. A photo surfaced in Brazil in 1975 showing 2 older men with the Anglins' exact scars. Reportedly, the family members had been in touch. Nothing confirmed, nothing denied. But one thing's for sure, no one ever found them. And, in the silence that followed, Alcatraz gained something even more interesting. Mystery. Because maybe, just maybe, they made it. Alcatraz has changed. No more prisoners, no more guards in the towers, just wind, water, and echoes. But if you stay on this island long enough, you can almost feel it, like the place is still remembering. Not just the famous names, but the forgotten ones. They were sent here to be broken, and they were. And us? We walked the same halls, stood in the same cells. Thanks for coming off the beaten path with us. If you enjoyed this video, please help us out and click the like and subscribe button. We're Carl and Jennifer, and we're off the beaten path. See you in the next one.